right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Dani Driscoll. I am a senior planner with Snohomish County Surface Water Management. As Sarah mentioned, Jessica Hamill will be giving a brief overview of an update of the Community Floodplain Solutions program. And following her presentation, Aaron Kopp, our water resources engineer, will give a presentation on the flood hazard studies that were conducted. And thanks to our consultants, UW Climate Impacts Group, Watershed Science and Engineering, and Cardno for helping us develop these studies. We ask that you type all your questions into the chat box, or you can send them directly to Sarah or myself. We will answer all questions at the end of both presentations, but please feel free to type them in the chat box as they arise. So with that, Jessica, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Dani. Folks, I'm Jessica Hamill. I'm a project specialist with Surface Water Management, and I am the Community Floodplain Solutions, or CFS, program manager. I'm going to stop my video here real quickly and adjust some things and share my screen because I'm not going to be looking this way as I present. So bear with me here just a moment. Okay, can everybody see the screen okay?
Yes.
Great. Just going to move the pictures of all of you. Sorry about that. Okay. So again, thanks everybody for having me. I'm the CFS program manager, and I also coordinate closely with our SLS facilitator, David Roberts. And I want to provide a brief overview of the Community Floodplain Solutions, or CFS program, as well as an update about implementation efforts to date, and close with where we're hoping to going with our phase 2 efforts that were just recently funded last year. Oops, let me get that going. There we go. Okay. So CFS is a collaborative effort to keep local farms viable, restore habitat for endangered salmon, and reduce flood impacts for residents. So simply put, we're furthering river management actions that balance the interests of people and natural resources. CFS advances the mission and goals of the Sustainable Land Strategy through implementation of the REACH scale plans, as well as the work of the ITs, to develop the landscape scale or ground level tools and approaches that operationalize those SLS goals and mission. We're piloting efforts in the Salton Reach of the Lower Skykomish River. And just to define some terms quickly, reaches are sections of rivers and estuaries defined for planning purposes based on natural characteristics and existing land uses. Reach scale plans have been developed to document baseline conditions and identify actions to advance those F3 interests in 5 priority reaches shown here on the map: the North Fork Stillaguamish, the main stem Stillaguamish, the Snohomish Estuary and Snohomish River, and the area we're talking about today, the Lower Skykomish. CFS advances strategies and actions identified in decades of resource planning, integration efforts, and meetings with community leaders and concerned residents. The primary SLS partners implementing elements of phases 1 and 2 of CFS are shown here on the screen, and they are Snohomish County Conservation and Natural Resources, the Snohomish Conservation District, the Washington Farmland Trust, and the Tulalip Tribes. Phase 1 efforts are concentrated in the Lower Skykomish River, river miles 9 through 16, in an area we call the Salton Reach. Phase 2 efforts will advance the Salton Reach projects while developing a pipeline of integrated actions farther downstream and including the Snohomish Estuary. So why here and why now? The Skykomish River has a long history of flooding, and river migration, flooding, and erosion regularly impact farms, businesses, and residential properties and force the closure of local roads. Flood risk is increasing with projected climate impacts. Since the adoption of the 2005 Salmon Recovery Plan, progress is being made on our habitat restoration targets, but much more work is needed, particularly with regard to restored edge and off-channel habitat. The Salton Reach is a key spawning area for Chinook, pink, and chum salmon, as well as steelhead. The area is identified as a top-tier priority for increasing Chinook salmon productivity in the basin. Climate conditions contributing to increased flood risks from flooding and erosion continue to damage the viability of agricultural operations, and local food production is in need of support. The demand for housing continues to push developments closer to river communities, and flood events continue to increase in frequency and severity. And residents want to hear how project actions will benefit them. And we need collaborative solutions that don't transfer hazards towards underserved populations or downstream neighbors. During this first phase, we hope to deliver the following benefits: reduce flood-related risk to people and public infrastructure, remove 3 fish passage barriers and culverts, which will improve access to over 2 miles of stream habitat, restore up to 30 acres of habitat along the Skykomish River banks, protect up to 200 acres of floodplain land for future restoration and long-term agricultural use. We will complete a design for an integrated floodway project and 2 to 3 agriculture resilience projects. We will model, assess, and map river conditions to inform future integrated projects, and you'll hear more about that component from Aaron in a moment. And finally, we are educating and learning from residents about living in a dynamic floodplain to better understand future risk. So we're currently entering year 3 of our phase 1 efforts. The first phase of actions began in July of 2019 and will be ongoing through 2023. The takeaway from this slide is that 2021 was our scoping and assessment period, moving into feasibility and designs in 2022 this year. Actions like land conservation, community outreach, and stakeholder engagement are ongoing throughout the life of the grant and the phase 1 effort. So I wanted to provide a quick update of our efforts over the last couple of years. CFS is currently identifying properties along the Lower Skykomish River that are eligible and best suited for multi-benefit projects to provide options for fish, farm, and flood uses. Recent flood hazard studies and the Skykomish floodplain land strategy are helping guide property acquisitions. Using acquisitions and other land use agreements, we can help people divest from high-risk areas, recuperate money for unusable land, and find ways to reduce losses to farmland while protecting and enhancing habitat. Through the work of the Snohomish IT, we secured additional funding from a second Floodplains by Design grant in July of 2021 to support our phase 1 and phase 2 efforts. We are also working on a guidance document for integrated floodplain management in Snohomish County. We're still honing the purpose statement, but in short, the guidance aims to 1, capture the county's existing organizational and functional structure for floodplain management, and 2, help the county shift towards a more coordinated, efficient, and comprehensive approach to floodplain management. Project scoping and design processes are underway in at least 4 locations along the Lower Skykomish River. And we currently have an interactive map displaying these locations on the CFS webpage. This map allows stakeholders and the public to comment on these 4 project areas as well as other locations. It's available through the end of this month, has been up since October, and it's helped us organize meetings with landowners and respond to public questions and concerns during the ongoing pandemic. So talk a little bit about the Lower Skykomish floodplain land strategy. This effort advanced. Stakeholders provided input and perspective to the county, and the effort became more than just a mechanism to prioritize land conservation efforts. We needed a versatile tool to help stakeholders better understand the various priorities related to different properties, as well as those interrelationships. We also needed a toolkit to allow for more approaches than just property acquisition, such as farmland conservation easements, channel migration easements, and other voluntary approaches, as well as collaborative implementation strategies. This figure shows the ability of this tool to display risk relative to other multi-benefit opportunities. This decision support tool is helping to understand overlapping interests to inform and coordinate on land conservation efforts, as well as project opportunities. The Snohomish Integration or Implementation Team was formed in November of 2019 and developed a package of projects that were included in the recently funded Floodplains by Design Award. Its members have extensive expertise in issues relevant to flood, fish, and farms, and the goals are to accelerate the magnitude and scale of multi-benefit projects in the basin, as well as increase community engagement and interest in participating in fundable solutions and create a network of engaged practitioners and landowners who share a common vision. Thanks to the work of that group, we just received funding for phase 2 actions in July of 2021. CFS phase 2 furthers the integrated approach funded in 2019 and expands its scope to include multiple reaches of the Skykomish and Snohomish rivers. The purple stars note the active projects funded by phase 1 in 2019, and the blue stars represent the proposed actions as part of the phase 2 CFS effort. Phase 2 project actions include land conservation, such as farmland conservation easements and fee simple acquisitions, as well as the implementation of agricultural viability and floodway improvements, and the final design of a large-scale integrated floodplain project. Phase 1 scoping efforts are underway now. By giving the river more room to move and providing locations for floodwater and sediment storage, integrated actions in this package seek to reduce flood risk to residents as well as businesses and infrastructure. Project actions are intended to protect soil fertility, reduce water needs, and improve a farmer's ecological relationship with the landscape. With the assistance from our partners, we are restoring natural river processes by designating areas where the river can reconnect to its historic floodplain, allowing the river room to create and maintain natural habitat through anticipated channel movement and side channel formation. This slide is a summary of all the project benefits that we hope to achieve with phase 2 funding. CFS partners have worked hard to leverage over $2 million of match, as well as an additional $6 million from other local, state, and federal funding sources for a total of over $16 million to support phase 2 investments. CFS would not be possible without the collaboration and coordination efforts of our SLS partners. And this is just a final slide with some CFS resources you can access. We've got the interactive project map here, the CFS website, the flood hazard mapping page, the Skykomish land strategy story map, which includes a link to the GIS-based decision support tool. You can also contact our team at cfs.info@snoco.org, and we will respond to any emails or outreach. And thanks very much for your time. I'll stop sharing and transfer it over to Aaron Kopp to give you an overview of the flood hazard studies. Go ahead, Aaron.
Afternoon, everybody. Here, let me push my screen out. So, could somebody tell me that they see the cover page?
Yes, we see it.
Fantastic. So I guess barring any questions from Jessica's presentation, unless that wants to be discussed now, I'll just go ahead and run through 22 slides here on the flood hazard study. No comments? All right, we'll get started. So, like Jessica said, Community Floodplain Solutions is a collaborative effort between the county and more than a dozen organizations, all working together to provide benefits for farm, fish, and flood communities. As part of our education outreach efforts, we wish to share the results of recent flood hazard studies along the Lower Skykomish River. And my name is Aaron Kopp. I'm a water resource engineer with Snohomish County Surface Water Management. So flood hazard mapping typically looks at water depth, how much water is in the river channel or on the floodplain. Our studies also looked at the river's changing shape and location, and not just the water depth across a broad reach scale. We took the projected climate change increases in rainfall from the UW Climate Impacts Group, the hydrological analysis, and ran the data through detailed two-dimensional hydraulic modeling produced by Watershed Science Engineering. and use all that information to assess future risk and channel changes in the Lower Skykomish River. And Cardno did the geomorphic portion of that study. So a little bit about the terms I'm using. The hydrology study looked at how much of the precipitation ends up as water in the river. The hydraulics study was computer modeling that shows the resulting depth and speed of the water downstream. Sometimes the water is in the channel, sometimes it's over on the floodplains or in the side channels. And using the hydraulics and hydrology data, we did a geomorphic assessment and mapped these risks and provided guidance on science-based processes to integrate farm fish and flood hazards and public safety concerns in decision-making and project development. So sounds like a mouthful, but we really rolled the H&H into geomorphology and risk assessment and looked at how that impacts farm fish floods and public safety. Purpose is assess the flood hazards, but also do so in a way that integrated fish habitat improvements with flood risk reduction. And all the while using the new H&H data to reflect not only current, but also future climate change. The study provided a science-based process to integrate farm fish and flood hazards and public safety concerns in decision-making project development. That's an important point worth stating twice. Provides guidance for how we set integrated project priorities. So we're working towards reach scale, long-term, vulnerable, permittable, and we're trying to make an integrated, significant, beneficial impact in that regard. I mean, without those bullets, things don't typically work out like folks expected them to. So study area was the Skykomish River from the cities of Gold Bar downstream, and this map is split into two portions, so you can kind of see where some of the roads and river alignments are. And down to the mouth, the confluence with the Snohomish River. Let's see what else. This area has a history of flooding and repetitive losses scattered along the river and floodplain. These recent studies helped identify the greatest likelihood of flood hazards along the Lower Skykomish River, including some severe hazards, which included areas of fast and deep floodwaters, areas of lateral channel migration, which occur when a river moves over time and naturally erodes one bank and deposits sediment along the other, and areas of high avulsion potential, the rapid relocation of a channel across the floodplain. So here's an example of deep and fast floodwater. Specifically, these are areas where the water is over 3 feet deep or moving faster than 3 feet per second. Channel migration is a process that describes how a river stream channel moves over time, eroding one bank and depositing material on the other. As opposed to another type of lateral channel another type of channel migration is avulsion, where the river channel goes through a rapid abandonment and formation of a new river channel. And this figure, what this figure is showing is that, there's a patch of trees right here, and it's also in a newer photo, but the river channel's now on the north side, in addition to being on the south. So what happened is that river just sort of jumped course and created a channel on the north side without ever taking those trees out. They remain there in the more recent photo as they were seen in the older photo as well. So here we're getting down to it now. These are some of the results of the studies. And we found that identification of the potential avulsions was based on the deep and fast flow of a 10-year flood event. So that's, the symbology that you're seeing in this figure here. The blue shaded areas represent where water depths are greater than 3 feet deep and or flow faster than 3 feet per second, creating a risk to public safety or adults walking in this area. A medium hazard area is shown as the green shaded judgment zone, kind of like that lighter greener shade. And this area could pose risks to adults. And there was a statement in here about how, it requires a personal judgment. And, this deep and fast flow area, DFF, is based on a risk to an adult walking in this area. That's kind of the standard. There's others, but such as, kids or cars trying to drive, but for the purposes of this analysis, we use the standard adult walking in that area. And so there's a high risk zone, a medium judgment zone, but what you're not seeing here is the low risk, which is, very shallow, very slow moving areas of the 10-year flood that are just not shown in this figure. So what I'm saying is that the 10-year flood extent is larger than what you see here in this figure. We're just not showing it because it's not a medium or a high risk. So the avulsions pose the highest flood risk in the floodplain as the channel migrates into existing small channels that can rapidly expand or carry more flow. And that's these blue areas here, the avulsion pathway zones. And it can lead to other areas like the South Slough complex. If these channels widen, they will widen the channels in the floodplain downstream, ultimately also leading into the South Slough channel. But the highest risk is in the blue areas where, we currently don't already have an active channel. But the risk of such is drastically different from what may be currently perceived. Similarly, there's channels behind the Salton training levee back here, and the area that could potentially be affected by failure of that levee, further failure of that levee, are shown here in red, as well as there's similar risks due to infrastructure downstream of the 311 plug levee and also the startup training levee should those fail. And those risks again are like avulsion risks or deep and fast floodwaters. So in the future, we're looking into what the climate change impacts, because we know that climate change is expected to affect rivers in 3 ways: through sea level rise, more intense heavy rains, and reduced snowpack. which will lead to higher winter flows and a 10% increase in peak flows. And the hydrographs shown here of monthly stream flow show the average summer flows and higher average winter flows. Excuse me. The hydrographs of the monthly stream flow show lower average summer flows, and here's the summer flows. The red is the average, and the black is current. And here's 2050s and here's 2080s. So let's take a look at 2050s. So in the winter monthly stream flows are expected to increase, and in the summer they're expected to decrease. I should also note that the hydraulics and hydrology studies had a different study area as compared to the geomorphic study. The geomorphic study was just the Lower Skykomish River, but the H&H studies applied to, the hydrology was for the whole Snohomish Basin, and the hydraulics what included the Lower Skykomish River as well as the Snohomish. So some more results from the H&H work was that we're looking at a foot of increase in the Lower Skykomish River in the 10-year flood depths by the 2050s. So it's kind of an average of these numbers here. And this is also going to correspond, or the H&H results indicate that there's going to be 35 to 75% decrease in lowest monthly stream flows by the 2040s. That's shown here in this figure from UW-SIG, and also from Baden et al. Based on this climate change impact, we're looking at there being a 22% decrease in Chinook spawners by the year 2050. That's this bar graph element here. So in summary, the climate change impacts include high flows occurring more frequently, increased flood depth and extent of flooding, and more dynamic river channel processes, greater rates of bank erosion, wood recruitment, sediment erosion, deposition, all of which is going to lead to increases in channel migration. But not everywhere. Some places where we're seeing it, it's probably going to increase more, and that's not going to happen everywhere. But through our hydraulic modeling, we're able to predict where some of this inundation is going to occur to a greater extent, and that is shown here along the Haskell Slough area, subreach 2, and it's shown as the orange and red areas, which are areas that are going to be inundated with water in the 10-year flood due to climate change impacts. And the orange would be inundated in a 2050 10-year flood, and by 2080 that 10-year flood would also include the red areas. An additional study that we did was in the Lower Skykomish River, we went and assessed all the, majority of the levees. We looked at 11 different structures, and here we're looking at a detail at the inlet of the Haskell Slough and its levee. The condition of the levee led to repair in 2020. This is an example of a project location that holds opportunities for farm, flood, and fish benefits. And Haskell's a specific example, but our overall approach is aimed at helping lower flood risk for the residents in the agricultural community while increasing salmon habitat without transferring the hazards to adjacent or downstream landowners. This next step slide was previously covered by Jessica and probably a little bit more current, but we're interested in talking with landowners and scoping and implementing projects that would have a benefit to farm, fish, and floods, and doing outreach. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to cfs.info@snoco.org or check the website for additional information. And I think that's all. Any questions?
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Jessica. It looks like, Aaron, we did receive one question from Kurt Nelson. What is the study that suggested a 22% in spawning? We can get back to Kurt and Morgan. Morgan said Aaron referred to Batten et al., but
yep,
we're not unsure of the article.
Yep, I can send that to Kurt.
Perfect. Any other questions? Please either turn on your video and chime in or type it in the chat box.
Come on, give me some tough ones.
Hey, Dani and Sarah, I did see something come in from Kurt and Morgan on what is the study that suggested a 22% decrease in Chinook spawning?
Yeah, Aaron said that he will send the article to Kurt here shortly.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Any others?
So how's the public outreach going from a standpoint of the community's response to this information? Seems like some of the images there that Aaron showed show some pretty significant changes in the current floodplain use if those scenarios come true.
Yeah, so I'll chime in a little bit and then Aaron can chime in because he's had more one-on-one conversations with landowners. But, in times of COVID, it's been really difficult to do traditional outreach, and the county and our consultant HDR have been very, very creative and innovative in developing ways to interact with the community in a safe manner. So we did record these presentations, kind of an incentives-based presentation for willing landowners. We only work with willing landowners that are available. And then also Aaron did a presentation that we recorded on the flood hazard studies. We sent that out through our e-list, email list, serve. We had Linda Nunzeg helped contact some of the key community members in the Sultan area to notify them that this was available online. We also have the interactive web map so people can provide comments, and we have received feedback from community members. And then I believe Aaron has also met one-on-one with some of those folks.
So the word's getting out there and you feel like you're reaching the key people that you need to, or what's your general sense of the amount of interaction that's resulted from this approach?
So
Mhm.
I want to jump in quickly and just say that we have sent some mailers out as well too. I think part of the sort of a chicken and egg situation, right? We need to get the word out and then determine if there's interest from the public to do anything about it, right? Or what the options are they want to explore. So we have really targeted on some specific areas. We did just send a letter out with information on FEMA programs that the county helps work with FEMA and the state Department of Emergency Management on. We sent those specifically to the Skyline View neighborhood. So that's a community of about 600 people roughly. It was the impetus to the Man Road Elevation Project. And as you could see from some of the maps that Aaron was showing, there's a potential avulsion pathway that could punch through the northern end of that community. So we wanted to make them aware of that. But we don't do folks worrying for them. So we don't know what their response is. We've sent that out. We haven't received any, as far as I know, any interest in working with the county on buyouts or FEMA or other entities as of yet.
Although it would seem that's the opportunity is to use this to approach those communities about that type of thing at some point in the future, I suppose. And yeah. Well, thank you.
Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll give everyone back some extra time in the afternoon.
Well, what's your next steps? I guess that's always the good question to leave you with. What do you what's going to happen next?
I think that would be the content of a separate presentation. That's a pretty loaded question for a few minutes. I think we're working on, as I said, phase 2 was awarded last year. The initial push is a lot of contracts, as folks know, getting the contract with the funder in place, our subawards with the conservation district and the tribe. So once the contracting is fully in place, we can start deploying the money a little bit easier. The phase 1 contracts have already been established and we're making really good progress. We're still interested in land conservation efforts. Like Dani said, we only work with willing partners. So any residents that are interested in working with us on different land conservation initiatives, we'd love to work with them. We are working with a few folks now. We have recently worked with a landowner to secure the Shingle Bolt Slough site. So we're looking forward to advancement of that project in that area. Ongoing efforts to do outreach and engagement with the community. With the pandemic, we've had to, as Dani said, be creative in our mechanisms. And so we'll continue to work on that. Continuing to work with Aaron and others to get the word out about the flood hazard studies, continuing to work with the county on the best practices for integrated floodplain management. So there's lots of things that we're working on, lots of components to this. Our partners are doing really amazing work in the Tualco Valley, Haskell-Riley Slough area. There's a lot going on there. In the Haystack Creek area, the Conservation District has just completed those culvert replacements there, which really has a nice area now of private and public culverts in that area that have been replaced. So there's a lot going on, a lot to come, and we're working on phase 3 and what that might look like as well.
Yeah, it might be interesting to have just a program on, you know, what successes you've actually accomplished so far. Just some nice pictures and things showing where projects have actually taken place. So looks like Kurt's got a question though.
Yeah, Aaron, I was kind of focused on your 1 foot of flood rise. And are there actions? Are there going to be enough? Can there be enough actions in the floodplain to mitigate that, to try to keep that down to, you know, the range that we're seeing now by, you know, training dike removal or anything like that? I'm sure you guys are looking at that. I was just curious if there are actions that can affect that.
Thanks, Kurt. That's an awesome question. And as part of continuing the work with this risk assessment that kind of came out of the geomorphic study, we're moving into a vulnerability assessment, looking at options related to the levees in the Lower Skykomish River. And in certain places, modifying those levees certainly does have an effect on the flood elevations. It would certainly range in values and extent, but that's something we expect to have results for probably by this summer, maybe fall of 2022. So, you know, I'll keep you in the loop as we move ahead with that. I mean, Shattuck is working with consultant, as well as I've got a similar consultant looking at hydraulics on the Haskell floodplain. So we should definitely know more about that, as well as, you know, further downstream with the confluence area. But, you know, I'm going to reserve my professional opinions on the changes or magnitudes of flooding. Excuse me, if I would reserve my opinions on whether or not modifications to the levees could mitigate the 1 foot increase of climate change effects in flood depths by 2050s. You know, in certain places, you know, removing a levee would lower flood depths, but it also increases flood depths elsewhere. So it's kind of a spatial question. You have to kind of look at it in 2D, but we'll have those answers, and we'll be able to have an informed discussion about that. So.
And on the other flip side, you also mentioned that summer low flows would be reduced by somewhere between 35 and 75%. So is it a correct interpretation to say that possibly we would be seeing a quarter of the summer low flow that we are seeing now in the Skykomish at some point in the future?
A quarter of it, potentially. I thought the range was, you know, 35 to 75% decrease, and that came from UW Climate Impacts Group. So I could send you a link to that study as well. And
I think what he was saying there, Aaron, is that
Yeah.
mean that conversely, should we expect maybe potentially in the summer months for the flow in the Skykomish to be about 25% of normal based on that UW metric? And I think the answer is potentially.
Yeah, I think that's
know.
on the high end.
75%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For now, I believe the plots of the monthly stream flow, not the plots, the chart of the monthly stream flow shows a corresponding increase in the mean, but I guess that low flow was looking at a different I don't want to use the word flow again, but it's that, you know, that around that 1,000 CFS in the Skykomish. So let me send that document to you, and we can talk more about that. But it's, as far as, you know, what flow they're particularly looking at and why they posted a range. But, you know, I've been really impressed with UW Climate Impacts Group's hydrology so far, and you know, would tend to have faith in their work.
Okay.
Hey, Keith, would you mind sending me your email address as so I can send you those documents as well? Thanks so much.
I think Keith said he didn't have any mic ability, but he might be able to type that, Aaron. Just wanted to let you know.
Got it.
Any other questions or comments? So what we can do, it looks like some other folks might be interested in those articles. We will get that to Sarah, and then Sarah can send that out to the whole group.
Sure. That makes it easy.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
I would just, in closing, doing these studies was a nice way to kind of try and pull things together. And, even then, in doing the H&H and the geomorphology, it was nice to be able to pull together some other studies from UW Climate Impacts Group, or some pertinent fisheries research out there. And it really posed an opportunity to do that, as opposed to just doing a flood study, or as opposed to just doing, a habitat project list. Is kind of integrating things and also being able to quantify it. So I'll definitely send those studies out, and glad for the good questions. I want to say thanks, and thanks for the opportunity to talk today.
I just wanted to mention that when you're talking about a 22% decrease in spawning in that report, you're talking about a biological response to a physical change. And I want to see how they went about interpreting and generating that 22% reduction in spawning caused by this in and of itself. If you can, I don't think you can, but so there's a lot that go into a biological response from changes in climate. So
I think the term they used was spawners. It was returning adults Chinook. It was a reduction in spawners, not spawn-in, but there could be a correlation. But I'll send that article out, and we can go from there.
So comment, just sort of some thoughts that came to my mind based on Kurt's probing question and Aaron's answer. And the first thought was, in light of the fact that we've heard plenty about sea level rise, there's a term relative sea level rise, which also takes into account how the land is moving vertically over time relative to that. So in light of that, there are some floodplain processes that could adjust the relative elevation, the elevation of the channel in the future, in response to a different flow regime. There could very well be some adjustments in the river channel, but also it made me think about the fact that ESA, Environmental Science Associates, did a modeling exercise. I think it was the entire coastline of the state of California, where they broke it down into 500-foot sections, and based on sea level rise projections and looking at the coastline, the sediments, whether it's a high bluff or a low bluff, and how erodible it is, they forecasted essentially the encroachment of the sea in the future, not just based on projecting that increased elevation onto the existing landform, but they estimated the future erosional rates of the coastline and really focusing on a hazard assessment. So again, just random thoughts that sort of reflecting on some different things based on Kurt's probing question. So I think there's a lot to think about there. Thanks for asking that, Kurt.